Playing it.
This is Noah.
This is Brady.
And this is Raleigh.
And this is the Lemon Podcast with Noah, Brady, Raleigh.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. And to start off, we're just going to go through the list of characters so we know who we're talking about. You know, we got Haeon, Daeon, Hanma-nu, and we got Shin Jong-jun, Shanghai Ioni, and finally Yoon Tarim. These are the main characters we'll be discussing today.
Yep.
So I kind of want to go back and go through one of those characters, Han-Ma-nu. Why did you say his youth for so long?
Well, basically, it's an inside joke within the Lemon story. You know, the kids at the school would used to make fun of Han-Ma-nu and, you know, essentially pronounce his name different funny ways. You know, haha, funny. Han-Ma-nu, that was one of the that was one of the ways it was pronounced.
Well, and, like, it kind of was early symbolism in the book, if, like, that kind of makes sense, because when he, like, kind of got framed for everything, they stopped giving him his nickname. Like, they barely referred to him. They just stopped talking to him.
And also, it's because he was a little bit underprivileged and underclassed, so
People kind of went and took advantage of the fact that he didn't have it all.
Yeah, exactly, and they found it easy to, like, put the blame on him.
Yeah.
So, that kind of ties into our first question. Who did you think did it before you found out it was Yoon Tarim?
To be honest, I thought it was Han-Ma-nu because I didn't really know his backstory at the time, and I didn't know that he was not as wealthy as some of the other characters in the novel.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. I also thought it was Han-Ma-nu. Yeah. Because like you said, you know, he was definitely underclassed, underprivileged, and also he was kind of dumb. You know how I mentioned in the story, like he didn't know exactly like what he was doing. He left out some details. Basically, like, so he just didn't have a good alibi.
I honestly didn't think it was Han-Ma-nu at first, because when they did that interrogation scene with the detective, he was kind of just putting it on Han-Ma-nu. He kind of seemed too dumb to answer the questions right, and he was just kind of getting locked into things where he didn't really want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of concerned of Shin Jong-jun because of when Han-Ma-nu saw him on that delivery.
Oh, when he was in the car,
When he was in the car. And then the only thing that, like, had my doubt is he was talking about Yoon Tarim being in the passenger seat, but he couldn't give, like, an honest description because he was talking about what she was wearing, but he couldn't have seen her if he was on his little scooter and she was in a big old SUV.
Yeah, that part just wasn't adding up at all.
And who was on the back of the scooter? You know how, like, Han-Ma-nu was riding on the scooter?
Yeah, I think that was Yoon Tarim.
No, I was that. Oh, you're right. It was.
Yeah, it was Yoon Tarim because later that became important of when she was stalking Shin Jong-jun for hanging out with Haeon. That was kind of the big old thing.
You're right.
I think I actually messed up earlier. I think I might have said that Yoon Tarim was in the car. I meant that Haeon was.
Yeah.
Because she was hanging out with Shin Jong-jun.
But yeah, Yoon Tarim, and that's how Han-Ma-nu found out. Like that's why Han-Ma-nu said, you know, what Haeon was wearing, because Yoon Tarim told him, right? Like, whispered in his ear.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Yoon Tarim was pretty wealthy, right?
I believe so. She was, I think, affluent, and you know, I mean, she was wealthy.
I think it was kind of less about riches in this part of the story, and it was more about, like, kind of how you look, because Yoon Tarim was described as the second prettiest in the book, and Haeon was described as the most. Yeah. And I think that's what made Yoon Tarim the most jealous, and ended up making her finally kill Haeon.
I agree with that.
Peeling off into the next question, Raleigh, before reading Lemon, we kind of learned about the Korean culture and did a research paper on it.
Mm-hmm.
What that you learned about the Korean culture has helped you understand the book a little bit more?
What I learned about Korean culture was there's a lot of emphasis on class structure and, like, the class hierarchies, whereas, like, characters like Han-Ma-nu, who are lesser and, like, less fortunate, you know, don't have as much money, stuff like that, they're not necessarily discriminated against, but they're definitely lower on, like, the what's the word for it? I guess the
class scale.
Seat at the table, you know, they're a little bit further down.
Scale.
Societal scale, yeah. Definitely a little further down, and they aren't as, like, listened to necessarily, whereas characters like Yoon Tarim, you know, more fortunate, you know, attractive, if you want to say that, like, they are listened to more and believed. So, like, no one really thought that, like, based on what I learned that the class structure is important. No one really listened to Han Manu and like his side of the story as much, whereas Yoon Tarim, no one really suspected her necessarily. Like she had, because of her class structure, you know,
Yeah.
where she was placed.
I also didn't know that there wasn't much of a middle class in Korea. It's either you're really wealthy or you're just kind of on the lower side of society,
Yeah.
and it really just doesn't go your way in life. So
Yeah, I think that kind of, I mean, this isn't about Lemon, but that Parasite movie that we had watched, I think it shows a great job of Korean culture with the stairs. I think that's great symbolism for how they're treated, because when it rained that one day, all that water flooded down and completely flooded that poor area of Korea. And I think it just kind of shows how the disaster kind of put down on the lower class, and the higher class just gets to look above.
I agree. And how can
Definitely.
how can you connect that to Han Manu and like what's happening to him?
Well, I think for Han Manu, he got flooded,
Yeah.
just like that lower end of Korea. He got
Exactly,
flooded by the detective
Yeah.
and got absolutely butchered for that interview with the detective.
So yeah, just relating back to how Han Manu was part of like the lower class. Shin Jung Jun was definitely part of the higher class, but I was definitely not expecting Yoon Tarim to be the murder suspect, just because of the fact that he was part of the higher class, and you know they aren't really thought to be one to do something like that. So.
Like the stereotype is definitely that. Like,
Yeah.
they wouldn't do something like
Yeah,
that.
and that's why the detective never went to Yoon Tarim. He only pressed on Han Manu.
Yeah.
Very heavily, and it was pretty clear that Han Manu had no clue what he was talking about in the interview. So
And also the fact that like maybe you know how Han Manu failed to mention Yoon Tarim in like the interview.
Yeah.
You remember that? I feel like that could also be a part of like Yoon Tarim being this like pretty high class lady, and like Han Manu just didn't want to mention her.
Han Manu is just like a really easy suspect to
Yeah.
make the
Yeah.
detective jobs even easier.
All right, going through towards the end of the book here, Riley and Brady, what do you think the significance of Shang Hui Iani's perspective was?
Well, to just jiggle this one up, the significance of Iani's perspective, basically, Daeon and Iani, you know, ran into each other in public. Iani's initial reaction was like, "Wow," you know, she got a lot of plastic surgery.
Well, that's common in Korea. Like,
Yeah,
that's
you're right.
Super common.
To relate that to class, like Korean culture, that is very common. And so anyway, but I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, I feel like Daeon got this plastic surgery almost to move on from Haeyeon's death and look less like her sister, you know.
Well, I wouldn't even say, I'll pop in real quick. I wouldn't even say it was to move on. I would say it was kind of to make her look like Haeyeon. I think it was a thing of like just kind of missing her so much, she tried to make her face the same as hers.
Yeah.
Because Haeyeon was always the prettier one.
Yeah.
I feel like we also kind of talked about that in class. She kind of fantasized over her own sister, and it got to a point where it was just like almost kind of weird in a way.
Yeah.
And it was also thought as like a coping mechanism. So
But anyway, to relate back to the question about the perspective, Iani adds this almost bird's eye point of view into Daeon's life, where Daeon, you know, is this grieving mess. You know, it talks about how they went out to lunch, and Daeon was just a complete shell of her former self, if you want to add anything onto that.
Well, yeah, and it's hard like not knowing who truly did it, because I kind of think Daeon believed Han Manu do it. And then when Iani kind of explained to Daeon, not that, because remember there was this whole thing of how she said that she saw Han Manu, but then her boyfriend like told her not to say anything. It was kind of this big old thing.
it was just a
and then-
big old mess that no one could really do.
And then I think when she finally, I think it was the World Cup that kind of set it off for her. Because
Yeah.
remember at the restaurant, the World Cup like kind of made her angry when all the kids were like cheering and like
Because
watching it.
it related back to like when the initial like Haeyeon death happened.
Yeah, and I think it was just kind of like a trauma thing. It kind of went back to trauma for them.
Uh-huh.
And I think like Iani's perspective just shifted down as a like whole for her life, because like you said, she was kind of sad and just kind of walking through life, but she never really, I guess, fully got the understanding until Iani's perspective.
Yeah.
So Brady, did you expect when Daeon took the baby, Yoon Tarim's baby?
To be completely honest, no. I was completely surprised. I didn't think Daeon almost had the guts to do that. You know, Yoon Taeim's babysitter was at the supermarket, and it was just with Yoon Taeim's baby, and just left her in the stroller. And then all of a sudden, Daeon comes in and steals the baby. Like, of course, I was surprised. And
Well, like, did you guys even realize it was Yoon Taeim's baby at first? I don't think I kind of caught
No.
that on at first.
I mean, I didn't, but afterwards, like finding out it was Yoon Taeim's baby, it makes sense because
Yeah.
you know Yoon Taeim murdered Haeyeon.
Yeah.
So it's okay to kidnap a baby.
Honestly, I wouldn't
Your
say
sister.
that.
I think
you
what
know.
Raleigh's trying to say here is that he sees the motive behind.
However, yeah, exactly. I see the motive, and I'm not gonna lie, Noah. If you killed my sister, I might steal your baby in the future.
it's not a
Okay.
bad point.
Like,
Keep
not-
that duly noted.
not a
Raleigh.
horrible point
Keep it duly
there.
noted.
I mean, I'm
Um,
just saying. Like, anyway.
So
what was your reaction, Noah?
My initial reaction, I was surprised. It was kind of like weird to me because it popped out of nowhere almost, the baby being stolen. Because it was like she left the stroller and bam, the baby was gone. And that's kind of how kidnappings work. And when I finally like realized like what was happening and caught on later in the book, especially when Daeon ended up changing the baby's name because like to make it more like her sister. And I think that just kind of shows Daeon never got over the murder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how could you? I mean, she got the plastic surgery, you know, became this completely different person. And you got to think, like, do you think that Daeon had been following Yoon Taeim's baby for like a while? Because she must have planned
I think it
this.
was definitely planned because there's no way she walks into the same supermarket as Yoon Taeim's
Yeah,
baby
yeah.
and just like, oh, what a coincidence. Let me steal the baby.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
also could be one of those you get the time and place type of thing, and she just
Yeah.
jumps to action because the
You're
book
right.
never went into detail about her plan into taking the baby.
Yeah, it
That
really
is
didn't.
true. So
It didn't.
I don't know. Maybe it was a lucky scene of events.
And I think that concludes the episode of the Noah
Brady Raleigh
podcast.